Welcome everybody. Welcome to our Friday afternoon webinar all about electric heating solutions. Pews to panels, chandeliers to cushions. This very practical webinar is going to be covering a range of direct electric heating solutions, of which there's a whole spectrum. Just to be clear, upfront, this webinar isn't covering heat pumps because we had a separate webinar all about that, and you can find that recording on our website. We've also run webinars in the past on whether to replace or not replace your heating system and how to choose the right heating system, and both of those webinar recordings are on our website as well. When I've finished with the housekeeping slides, I'll put the link through to that page so you can find all of those past recordings. I always begin with the trailers for upcoming attractions. So we've got a second run of this same topic on the 18th of October. So if you get to the end of this and really wish that a colleague had been able to come along, don't worry, you can let them know and they can come along to the second run. For those of you who were due to come on Tuesday, that's what we've rescheduled it to. And George, thankfully, is feeling better now and pressing on through this afternoon. And then in November, we've got two sessions. For the first time, we're doing some sessions on climate resilience. So normally we're talking about climate mitigation. How do we stop our emissions and stop climate change? Those two sessions are saying, okay, more extreme weather is coming. How do we get prepared? So the first is about how you prepare your church itself, how you make the building more resilient. And the second is about how the church can help the community to be more resilient. When I finish the housekeeping, I'll put the link through to the details and how to book for those sessions. In terms of the housekeeping for today, it's the usual if you've been along to one of my webinars before. So we'll use the Q&A for the questions. Please do open up the Q&A, type your questions in there, and you can do a thumbs up next to other people's questions if they're the thing that you're interested in. When we get to the end, we'll focus on the questions that got the most votes and have risen to the top. After the webinar, I will send you the slides and any links from the chat. Given this one is a Friday afternoon, I probably won't do that until Monday, if you can bear with me. And I am recording today's session, and it normally takes a couple of days, but then we get them onto our website so that you can watch them again or share them with other people. Most importantly, our speaker today is George Evans, who is the Managing Director of BN Thermic, with many years of experience in designing and installing heating systems, including installing in about 200 churches. So he knows all about how to put electric heating into churches. George understands, he and I have discussed this a couple of times, this is not a sales pitch for BN Thermic. George has come to speak to us because he's got experience of a lot of the different types of technology that are out there, and he's going to be talking to you about them and the pros and cons of each different approach and when they're suitable. Right, let me stop sharing my screen, which means George can put his slides up and lead us away.
Okay. There we go. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for everyone for tuning in on this Friday afternoon. My name is George Evans. I'm the Managing Director of BN Thermic. The subject today, electric heating solutions for churches. I have been specifying heating systems for about 10 years now, and I specialize in commercial and industrial projects. So anything from a village hall right up to a power station and all sorts of things in between. Now, I've been to hundreds of churches, and I've honestly seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to installations. I've seen where people have had problems. I've seen where the right system's been in, the wrong system's been in. So I really feel qualified to be hosting this today. And as Catherine said, we'll have the Q&A at the end. But if anyone has any questions, technical questions, and you think we might be on the phone for an hour, please give me a call. Please give me a call next week. It's not a problem at all. So let's get started. I'm going to throw lots of information at you, and we will give you all the slides to this. So if you can take notes, great. If not, we will give you all the information. So the purpose of today's webinar, I'm going to demonstrate a number of electric church heating solutions, discuss the pros and cons of each solution, identify the differences between direct heating and space heating, and identify which solutions are better suited to a frequently used or intermittently used church. What I'm hoping to do is give you some information so that you're in a better place to make an educated decision if you are looking at your heating. So the only thing that I won't be going over today is how to design a heating system, because I think we'd be here all day. So that's the only thing we're not going to cover. Well, let's get stuck in. So first slide here, net zero carbon. Obviously, since the Church of England's announcement, there's been lots of interest in electric church heating solutions. So hang on. Sorry. There we go. So yeah, your path, when partnered with a green energy provider, every heating system we go over today will assist you on your path to becoming a net zero carbon church. And what I would definitely recommend is going onto the Church of England website. There's a lot of good content, and there's some really good video case studies that have been up recently on it. So I would have a look at that. Just wanted to put this slide in as well, because throughout this I talk about space heating and I talk about direct heating, and they're very different. So space heating systems, they are creating and maintaining a warm body of air within a premises. So a space heating system in a church is where we're going to warm all the air within a church and usually control it on a thermostat. A direct heating system is heating people directly whilst not trying to warm the air within a premises. So within a church, if you've got a congregation that's only covering sort of half your nave on a Sunday service, you're just trying to directly heat those people and not trying to heat your aisles or your chancel or anything else. So they're the two differences, and I hope I've made that fairly clear there. So products we'll be going over today, all electric. We've got heated cushions, pew heaters, panel heaters, storage heaters, far-infra-red heaters, quartz halogen heaters, and suspended chandeliers. And as Catherine said, I'll be going over pros and cons of all of them. So let's get stuck in. So the first one is heated cushions. So what are they? They're upholstered cushions with heating elements interwoven inside. They can be portable or hardwired and are suitable for chairs, pews, and benches. So there's heated cushions aren't just for pews. If you've taken your pews up and you've got chairs, you can still have there's still a solution for you. So how they work: when a cushion's electric heating element energizes, it begins to emit heat upwards towards the seat occupant, a similar principle to a heated car seat. And if you see my little diagram here, my little man in the green shirt, so his system, you've obviously got the heated seat and you've got a heated backrest. If you look at the photos there, they're just a heated seat, and a lot of them are all custom made for the size of your pews or your seats. So space heaters or direct heaters. For all of these slides, I've just put this little gauge you can see in the bottom left. So heated cushions are definitely direct heaters, direct people heaters. Heated cushions are designed to live on pews or seats and directly heat occupants. Their main role is not to try and warm all the air within a church. It's about heating the people that are occupying a seat. Suited to which type of church? Again, I've used my little gauge here. I'll dive into this quickly. A frequently used church, in my mind, I'm picturing a church that might have taken the pews out. They might have a play group during the day, choir practice. It might be rented out. You'll have your Sunday service. It's in constant use. And an intermittently used church, I'm picturing a rural church. It's used for 1 hour on a Sunday and maybe a meeting during the week. So that's how I'd sort of separate those two. So going back to heated cushions, I would say an intermittently used church, they're very suited for those, where people come in on a Sunday, you turn them on 10 minutes before a service and then turn them off when you're finished. So the pros for electric heated cushions: unobtrusive. So heated cushions are incredibly unobtrusive and emit no light, noise, or draft output. They go virtually unnoticed. Incredibly economic. So heated cushions require virtually zero warm-up time and are usually only on for an hour at a weekly service. Aesthetic and comfort. So heated cushions usually come in different fabrics and designs to match or add to the aesthetic of your church. And they also tend to be using soft to be made using soft insulation, so they are quite comfy to sit on. So one of the pros here is easy install. Now this is for a portable heated cushion. So this isn't one that's installed and uses mains power. This is portable, battery powered. Portable heated cushions do not require an electrician to install. So they're really install that you can do yourselves. Okay. So cons of heated cushions. I guess this one's a bit of a pro and a con. So requires charging. Again, this is if you've got a portable system. So portable cushions require their batteries to be charged, which is not a terribly sort of laborious task. But if you've got 100 of them, you will have to put that into consideration. Someone will be in charge of charging all of those cushions. One of the other cons I've got here, which you'll see come up with a few of the other products, is you can't heat the chancel or vestry, etc. So as heated cushions only heat seat occupants, they will not heat people standing in the chancel, the vestry, the narthex, etc. So you'll walk into a church, it will be cold, and you will only be warm when you are sitting down. And I think the only other con I've got here is that they have a low output. So heated cushions have a very low output and may require additional heaters. We all know how cold churches are, and you might find yourself sitting on your hands after a while. Okay, so just to recap again, I'm sorry, I'm absolutely rattling through this, but just to recap, heated cushions are a direct heaters, heating people, and they're ideally suited for an intermittently used church. Okay, product number 2 are pew heaters. So what are they? They're a low-level convector heater that lives under church pews and heats people directly. And they were actually used in the first net zero carbon church, which was St Andrew's in Chedworth over in Gloucestershire. So how they work, you can just see the little diagram in the bottom there. Cold air enters the heater at the bottom, passes the heating element, and then warm air convects upwards. And this creates a gentle breeze of warm air that rises past pew occupants, which you can see on that diagram. So space heaters or direct heaters, they are very much direct heaters, direct people heaters. Pew heaters are designed to live under pews and directly heat pew occupants. Suited to which type of church? Definitely an intermittently used church. They get up to temperature very quickly. So for a Sunday service, you can have it on a couple of minutes before and turn it off when you're finished. So pros, unobtrusive. Pew heaters tend to be powder coated brown and emit no light, draft or noise output. They go virtually unnoticed. Incredibly economic. Pew heaters require virtually zero warm-up time and are usually only on for an hour a week. Now, I did a little bit of working out here. Sorry. I did a bit of working out here. There we go. So let's make up a pretend church here that we've got 30 pews, so 15 on each side. And on each pew, you've got 2 300-watt heaters. Now, I Googled the average UK tariff at the moment, and it reckons it's 34p. So I've done it at 34p. So if you've got a 34p per kilowatt hour tariff, a service would cost you £6.12p, and that's to heat every pew in your church. So if you've only got half the congregation in, half the pews are occupied, it's £3.06p. And if any of you are lucky enough to still be on a fixed rate tariff that's down sort of 15p an hour, you're looking at £2.70 for my pretend church, every single pew to be heated. So I thought I'd just put that in there to give you a kind of real life example of how cost effective it is. Easily controlled and zoned is another pro. So each pew heater is usually installed with an independent switch, allowing you to only heat the pews that are occupied. So again, if you've got if it's a funeral in the springtime and it's cold, you might have all your heaters on. If you've got a Sunday service, your first 5 rows are occupied, you can just turn those 5 heaters on, 5 pews on. So heat output as well. So pew heaters are usually between 300 and sort of 650 watts per heater. They do not require additional heaters. They do kick out a lot of heat. Cons. requires fixed pews. I know that sounds so obvious, but if a pew has no pews or movable pews, you cannot install pew heaters. And I have seen people try it, and it's a health and safety nightmare because there's cables running everywhere. So if you haven't got fixed pews, you can't use pew heaters. One of the big cons as well is power, and you'll see this come up for a lot of these heaters as well. So the electrical load of a multi-pew heater installation often requires an upgraded electrical supply. This is really important, and especially if you're in a more rural area and you need to bring, you know, an upgraded supply in, you're going to have to get a quote for that before you start. And I think that's really, really, really important to point out. And again, I've got, just like the cushions, cannot heat the chancel, the vestry. It'll only heat people that are sitting on pews. So you will walk into that church, it will be cold, you sit on a pew, and it will definitely warm you up. So to recap, pew heaters, they are direct heaters, they are heating people directly, and they're ideally suited to an intermittently used church. Okay. So product number 3, storage heaters and panel heaters. Now, I've put these two together because they are very similar, but there's just a couple of nuances that make them different, and I will explain. But ultimately, what are they? They are wall-mounted electric radiator-style heaters that radiate and convect heat into a room. So how do they work? Panel heaters, which is the image in the top left. When energized, a panel heater's electric elements heat up and convect heat upwards. You also feel heat radiating if you're in close proximity. So it's a little bit like your radiator at home. If you stand a couple of feet away from it, you can feel a bit of warmth coming off it. It's not much, but you can feel some. Storage heaters. Storage heaters use off-peak energy tariffs, so economy 7 and economy 10, to heat bricks. The retained heat in the bricks then convects into the room when required. So again, it's a radiator style heater, but it just gets its energy in a slightly different way to the panel heater. So space heaters or direct heaters, they are definitely space heaters. So this is if you're taking your gas system out and you want to space heat your church and you want it 16 degrees or 18 degrees or 20 degrees, this is a solution. So storage heaters and panel heaters are both space heaters and will try and build and maintain a warm body of air within a church. They cannot be used to directly heat people. So suited to which type of church? The gauges go in the other way. It's a frequently used church that you want to keep at a desired temperature throughout the week. So storage heaters and panel heaters, the pros, technology. So technology is constantly improving. Heaters now have built-in setback settings, open window detectors, etc., which all reduce energy consumption. The market, because a lot of new build domestic projects aren't going with gas, the demand for storage heaters, panel heaters has definitely gone up. And with that, the technology has come on leaps and bounds. So for instance, you know, setback settings, what that will allow you to do is maintain your church at 10 degrees. That's your setback setting. So now the fabric and the walls and everything is getting warmer. And then you have a sort of boost it to a comfort setting, which might be 18 degrees, which is when the church is occupied. And what that means is you haven't got that awful situation where you go Saturday, the church is literally -2. It's freezing. The walls are cold. Everything's cold. And then you go, right, we need it on. And we're trying to boost it up to 20. And you're just heating a church for 2 days, full blast, to get it going for an hour on a Sunday. So again, the technologies and control has come on leaps and bounds. Another pro, off-peak tariffs. Again, this is only for the storage heaters, but by warming a storage heater's bricks at off-peak times, you are using the lowest possible energy tariff available. So you're using the cheapest energy off-peak, but then you're using that energy on peak. Noise and draft. Both heaters emit no noise or draft output and would not disturb a service, which is great. Okay, cons. Mounting. Both heaters need to be installed onto walls. Most churches have limited space and you will often need 5, 10 or 15 heaters. If you're space heating and you've done a heat loss calculation, and to outweigh that heat loss and heat your church, you need 30 kilowatts, chances are you're going to need 10 3-kilowatt panel heaters. They're going to have to be equidistant, spaced nicely around the church. which creates all sorts of problems because you've got pews. That's definitely one of the cons of going with a radiator style heater. Heat loss is another one. Both heaters convect heat which will rise and escape. This heat loss will greatly affect warm-up time, which in turn negatively affects energy consumption. So the problem you get is obviously heat rises. So you turn these heaters on and all your warm air will rise, go to the roof, which is uninsulated, and will escape. And you're almost waiting for that air to come down to ground level. On average, you're looking at about 2.5 degree temperature increase per meter of elevation. So if you've got a church with a 10-meter ceiling and your panel heaters have worked so that it's 20 degrees at ground level, it could be 45 degrees at the top, and that's all that warm air that you've paid for is now escaping up the top. That's heat loss, and it's one of the problems. And you'll all know this if you've got a gas heating system, because you've got exactly the same problem and all the birds are nice and warm on your roof. Another con, power. Again, you'll see this cropping up a lot. The electrical load of a multi-heater installation often requires an upgraded electrical supply. And the last one with storage heaters and panel heaters, you can't zone the heating. You know, the heat is space heat and cannot successfully localize heat. All heat will dissipate before reaching an intended target. So if you're popping into a church to have a meeting and there's a couple of you and you turn a panel heater on and you go in front of it, it's not really going to localize heat. You're not really going to sit there and feel comfortable because all your heat is rising. Okay, so to recap, storage heaters and panel heaters, they are space heaters and they are ideally used in a frequently used church. Okay, far infrared heating. I think, I'll be very honest, this was the toughest product to talk about. So far infrared, in the industry, we usually call it long wave radiant. So you have long wave and short wave. Far infrared was a sort of German term that crept into the UK. Now, I'm a massive fan of long wave radiant heating. It's one of my favorite heaters out there. Just personally, I've specified them in all sorts of applications, but you've got to know what you're doing. There has to be a design done. You've really got to pay attention to what's going on because it can go wrong. And I will explain all of this. So what are they? They're radiant heaters that provide gentle comfort heat. So how do they work? So far infrared long wave radiant heaters work in a similar way to the sun. So the sun warms the earth, but you feel warmer when you're in the sun's rays. So a long wave radiant heating system will space heat a room, a premises, a church, and humans will feel warmer when they are under the beam of the heater. And we call that beam the radiant effect, when you're under a beam of a long wave heater. So space heaters or direct heaters, you can see on the gauge, it's leaning towards space heaters. So long wave radiant heaters are space heaters and controlled via a thermostat. But my gauge isn't all the way down because it is possible to spot heat people, but you need a very high watts per meter squared density. In a large church, the kilowatt requirement is usually impractical to spot heat. And again, I will show you an example of that. Suited to which type of church? Again, it's leaning towards a frequently used church. It's space heating, put it on a timer, put it on a thermostat. It's a wonderful system. Pros of far infrared heaters / long wave radiant: unobtrusive. So long wave radiant heaters emit no light, draft or noise output. They go virtually unnoticed and often can be mounted up to 9 meters. So you can really get them up out the way and you don't even know they're there. So energy efficiency, it has 2 sections here on the pros of energy efficiency when using a long wave radiant heater. So when you are in the beam of a long wave radiant heater, you will naturally feel warmer than the ambient air temperature. This means you can turn your thermostat down 3 to 4 degrees, which is above me right now in my office. You can set your thermostat, say you want it to be 20 degrees in your church, you set it at 16. Which doesn't sound much, but if you imagine you've got a 30 or 40 kilowatt load and it's going, and it's stopping at 16 versus stopping at 20, that buffer is energy that you've saved. And if you times that over 6 months, especially at the tariffs we're paying now, that is a huge saving. So you're not having to whack it up to 20, you get it to 16 and it's comfortable. And my office is exactly like that. I think my thermostat's at like 17 and it's wonderful. And I've had to put the fan on because it's too warm. So it's a really, really energy efficient system. And the second part to it being of the energy efficiency of long wave radiant heat is the heat gradient is negligible when using long waves. So experienced temperatures at ground level are similar to the temperatures at high level. So with a panel heater, and you've got that 2.5 degrees per meter of elevation, it's getting very warm at the top of your church. With long waves, if you got on a step ladder and went to the top of your church, it's almost the same temperature as it is at the bottom. So you haven't got that heavy cloud of warm air at the top that's escaping. So again, this is why I'm a massive fan of long wave heaters. And the last pro here is aesthetic. There are several long wave radiant heaters on the market that come in all different kinds of finishes: marble, wood effect, stone, all that kind of stuff. Architects really, really like it, and I can see why. But yeah, have a little browse. There's lots on the market. So cons, I've split cons into regularly used churches and intermittently. So the cons of having a regularly used church and putting a far infrared long wave radiant system in here, it's difficult to zone the heaters. So long wave radiant heaters space heat and are not ideally suited for localizing heat. Heat tends to dissipate before reaching an intended target. Now, if I designed a heating scheme and I had it at a certain watts per meter squared density to heat the whole area, if you then go into the aisle and turn a couple of those heaters on that are mounted at 4 meters and sit under them, they are not going to localize that much heat. You'll need a bit more oomph. So they're not great for localizing. You can, but they're not great. Power, again, we've seen this on the other slides. The electrical load of a long wave radiant heating system often requires upgraded electrical supply. Mounting. Now, long wave radiant heaters are either wall mounted or suspended, which will involve drilling into the structure of the church. Obviously, if it's a listed building, you're going to have to deal with that, unfortunately, but there's no way of getting around that. And warm-up time. With any space heating system, there is always a warm-up time to be taken into consideration. So control is so important. Otherwise, you're back to square one of turning a heating system on a Saturday for a freezing cold church and trying to get it warm for a Sunday. Now, I wanted to put this slide in. I'm sorry if it's a bit confusing, but when I started this and I said I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly, this is sometimes where I've seen the ugly, where I'll be very honest, I feel people are sometimes sold a dream of this magic heat that you can't see, that spot heats immediately and is great. And I've been around the block enough to know that that often is not true. So the con of using long wave radiant heating in an intermittently used church, so your church that's freezing cold, I need it for an hour on a Sunday and I'm sold on this technology, is the kilowatt requirement for spot heating. So it is possible to provide localized heating with long wave radiant heaters, but you need a very high watts per meter squared density. If a church needs instant heat, you are solely relying on the radiant beam of the heaters. So we're ignoring the air temperature. We just want to be in that beam of the heater, which might be 5 or 6 meters in the air. So this little orange box on the side here, spot heating density, and I've made up a church. Now I've got a church here, a nave that's 20 by 7, which I think is reasonable. I've got 2 aisles that are 20 by 4. I've got a chancel that's 5 by 7, and you're looking at 335 meter square footprint. Now, if you came to me and said, George, we're sold, we need far infrared, heat my church, get it to 20 degrees, I'm going to go in at 300 watts per meter squared. That means you would require 100.5 kilowatts or 435 amp, which is highly impractical. Usually when you upgrade your power supply, you get 100 amp 3-phase, meaning you get 300 amp to play with. You'd already be 50% out on that, and that's before you turn the lights on, before you boil the kettle. So I hope that makes sense. And I just wanted to include this slide in there to say it is possible to spot heat with far infrared, but please get a design done. Speak to a manufacturer, speak to your installer, ask someone how they have, what assumptions they've made and how that they've designed a system, because I've seen it go wrong, but it can go right. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. So just to recap, far infrared heaters, long wave radiant, they're a brilliant heater. They're great for space heating, and they're great if you've got a frequently used church and you can get this system bobbing in and out on a thermostat. Okay, shortwave quartz halogen heaters. This is product number 5. We are rattling through this. Okay, shortwave quartz halogen. What are they? Radiant heaters that provide instant comfort heat. How do they work? Shortwave quartz heaters heat mass, so people and surfaces, not air within a premises. When the heaters are energized, any person within the beam of the heater feels instantly warm. And the heaters are usually switched on 5 minutes before a service and turned off as soon as it ends. They are the definition of direct heating. There is no heater that will warm up quicker. And that's categorically true. They are instantly up to 100% efficiency immediately as soon as you turn them on. So space heaters or direct heaters, they are direct people heaters. So shortwave quartz halogen heaters heat people, not the surrounding air. They're incapable of being used to space heat. As soon as you turn them off, you're back to it being freezing cold in your church. Suited to which type of church? Definitely an intermittently used church, because they're so up to temperature so quickly. So your Sunday service, 2 minutes before you turn them on. Pros, well, 0 warm-up time. So quartz heaters are instantly effective, meaning no warm-up time is required and no energy is wasted. They can be energized 2 minutes before a service. 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it doesn't really matter. I guess if you put it on 5 minutes before, you might just take the chill off the pews slightly. But again, you could turn them on 10 seconds before anyone sits down. Running costs, as they are instantly effective, most churches only need the heaters on for an hour a week, and most services will cost less than £10. Heaters easily zone. So as heaters directly heat people, you are able to localize heat into the nave, aisles, the chancel, and it allows you to adapt to the size of your congregation or event. It means if you're having a meeting during the week, you can put one heater on, all sit under it, and you'll be instantly warm. Or if only half of the nave is occupied, you can heat the front half, just turn the heaters on at the front, so you can zone it very easily. And I've put user-friendly controls here. Quartz heaters are usually controlled via push-button timers and simple on-off switches. I know the cushions of the pew heaters are as well. I could have mentioned that. But yeah, the quartz halogen heaters, usually you see a switch and it will say aisle 1, aisle 2, nave. It's really, really simple on-off switches. So the cons for shortwave quartz halogen heaters, the number one is definitely the light output. So traditionally, shortwave quartz halogen heaters give off a red glow / light output, which is often unpopular with churches. And what I would say is if you go back 10, 15 years, you have ruby red lamps in the heaters, you turn them on, they are glowing red. They're really, really deep red. I think lamp technology has come on leaps and bounds. So if you're looking at this style of heating, do your homework, see some samples, speak to some manufacturers, because they are working on reducing that light output all the time. Cons, again, power. The electrical load of a shortwave radiant heater installation often requires an upgraded electrical supply. And mounting, again, is another con. Just like the long wave heaters we looked at, shortwave radiant heaters are either wall mounted or suspended, which will involve drilling into the structure of the church. And what I might add there is with the shortwaves and the long waves, it's usually they'll be mounted about 4.5 meters on the arches if you've got aisles. And if you haven't got aisles, they'll just go straight up onto the wall. So to recap, shortwave quartz halogen heaters, they are definitely direct heaters and they work very well in intermittently used churches. Okay, this is the last product we're going to look at, which are suspended chandelier heaters. So what are they? Chandelier heaters are chandeliers with radiant heaters attached. How do they work? The style of heater attached to a chandelier will dictate exactly how it works. So if a shortwave quartz halogen heater is attached, the chandelier will provide instant direct heat, just like the one in the photo. And if a long wave radiant heater is present, the unit will space heat the air within a church. So it very much depends on what heater is attached to the chandelier. Again here, space heaters or direct heaters very much depend on what heater is on there, hence my gauge being in the middle. It depends what heaters have been installed onto the chandelier. And again, suited for which type of church, it depends what heaters are on there, and that will dictate what type of church they are best suited to. So the pros, hang on a second. I think the aesthetic is a big pro. I think they can look great. You know, chandeliers can really add to the aesthetic of a church. Yeah, if you have a lot of them have really quality lighting options on them as well. If you're going to go down the route of having radiant heaters, having them tucked inside a beautiful looking chandelier, I think that's really good personally. Mounting, as the chandeliers are suspended, you can avoid drilling into walls. Now, some churches have beams you can easily hang chandeliers off. That's the best scenario. I'm not an expert when it comes to grade listings, but I've heard before that the fact you can hang a chandelier means you're not drilling into anything, which I think you'll probably get a thumbs up if you grade 1 listing. Again, you can look into that yourself. Sounds a silly one, but one of the pros is choice. So if you're sold on the idea of getting chandeliers in your church, you have the choice then to whether go for long wave or short wave heaters, depending on how frequently you use your churches. So it gives you that choice. Cons, I've put light output there. If you've gone for short wave heaters, you might get that red light output, which is a con. And I must admit, I've seen a couple of installations in the flesh and they've tended to be the short wave instant heat. So you will get that red light output. Power in here again. If you've got multiple chandeliers, you will probably need to upgrade your electrical supply. And mounting can be a pro, can be a con. Ideally, you need support beams to hang the chandeliers from. With no support beams present, you would have to drill into the church's roof to hang the chandelier. So I've seen some chandeliers that are metal. I'm imagining they'd be fairly heavy. You put 4, 5, 6, 7 heaters on there, I imagine they'd be fairly heavy. So you'd have to get someone to really look at that roof, make sure it's load bearing, and that you could put multiple chandeliers on there. To recap, sorry, this slide doesn't really help you at all. Again, depending on what style of heater you've got on there will dictate whether it's going to be heating the person, heating the church, or if it's good for an intermittently used church or a frequently used church. So I've absolutely rattled through that. I hope that was interesting. I see the Q&A is filling up, which is great. Just to recap, the purpose of today's webinar, to demonstrate a number of electric church heating solutions. I hope I've done that. I hope we've covered some interesting stuff there. Discuss the pros and cons of each solution. I've tried to be fairly honest there. As I say, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I just want to help people make informed decisions. Identifying the difference between people heating and space heating. I hope I've explained that. Identify which solutions are better suited to a frequently used or intermittently used church. Again, I hope that has helped. Thank you for your time. As Catherine said, we'll send this over to you. My details are in the bottom left there. If you've got any questions, give me a call, get me on LinkedIn. And yeah, thanks for your time. Much appreciated.
That was incredibly useful, George. If you're happy to stop sharing your slides so people can see us again. We've got a lot of questions that have come in. Everyone who's listening, please do have a look at the Q&A and do a thumbs up next to the questions which are most similar to yours, because we're not going to have time to go through them all. And I want us to spend our time on the ones that have the most upvotes. Right, let's start at the top with the one that's got the most votes and we will proceed from there. So the first question is from Peter, which is, if we switch from space heating, gas and radiators, to direct heating, are we likely to run into damp problems arising from increased condensation on walls? So do you go back and visit your installation churches afterwards? Have you seen what happens afterwards?
Definitely, I've seen a number. It is such a good question, that, and I would hate to say, oh, it'll be fine. And I'm not, probably not the best person to ask. I'm not trying to just pass on that question. It is a very tricky one. It is a very tricky one, that if you went to Quartz halogen heaters and you left your church 6 days of the week without anything, what will happen to condensation? I'm not the best person. I don't think I'm qualified enough to say yes or no, because it's the fabric of a building that's 700 or 800 years old. And I'm sorry, I can't answer that one with more conviction, I'm afraid.
So I can certainly say that I know of some churches where it's been absolutely fine, where they've had direct electric heating for, several years now and are very happy with it. Equally, I suspect that those were churches which didn't have a problem with damp to start with. Yeah. I think if you know you've got a problem with damp, then do everything you can to sort that problem before you think about switching away, because you don't want to change your heating solution if you've got an underlying damp issue, and that's exactly the kind of thing where you're going to need advice from somebody who knows your church and knows your circumstances.
I think a silly way of looking at it for me would be probably no news is good news. I haven't had churches go, look, we stripped out our system, we put pew heaters, put pew heaters in there, and we've had XYZ problems. So yeah.
Right. The next most popular question is from Alison. Can you share any advice on temporary electric heating options to allow a church with a broken boiler to stay warm enough for the current winter while working on a renewable option for the longer term? So that might be something like the heated cushions that you mentioned, which you could have on a temporary basis.
Yeah, of course. A temporary one. Heated cushions would be a very good shout, because you can just measure it up, get them in. You don't need an electrician. You could get it going very quickly. I've seen people try it with halogen heaters on tripods. Very dangerous. Lots of cables lying around. If heaters don't have capsize functions, they fall over, they don't turn off. So be very careful with that. Temporary solutions. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because with a temporary solution, you don't want to spend lots and lots and lots of money on something that absolutely works. So something like the cushions would be a good idea.
The other thing, so literally this week, and I suspect it might be the same person that's asked the question on the Church Energy Advisors Network. So the Church Energy Advisors Network has been discussing this week, and they've been giving the pros and cons of temporary boiler hire. So you can actually hire in a temporary boiler that gets, brought in on a truck to the church and attached to the heating system. There are definitely some cons as well as some pros, but it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Presumably you can also, is it possible to rent some of the electric heaters that you mentioned?
Ooh, we don't.
I've taken you out of your area, haven't I?
No. Well, the sort of the higher market for heaters, you are into portable quartz halogen heaters. These sort of these big units that go on wheels. I see a lot of the time they're used on building sites and things like that, and people might well have seen them. You could rent those. Other than that, I don't know of any rentable, unless you had a generator and you had something along those lines, but I don't know whether that's just getting a bit bonkers, if you know what I mean.
All right. The third question, now we're definitely onto direct heating here. Okay. We're thinking of direct heating, but we're worried that we will still need to run our gas-fired space heating as well. Can direct heating completely replace the need for space heating?
I think, of course it can. Of course it can. But with a space heating system, if you are only using it to warm, if it's an intermittently used church and you are using a space heating system to warm a church for an hour service on Sunday, 100%, you'll cover when a proper design is done, you'll cover every single inch that you need to cover. Not a problem. You're not going to have people sat there cold, because we can work it out. Now, if your church is in constant use, the benefit of a space heating system is that it goes onto a thermostat. So you get it up to the desired temperature and then it bobs in and out and you're not spending any money. So if your church is used for a long period of time, 4 or 5 days a week, if you're going with shortwave quartz halogen heaters, your electricity meter might be doing this a bit. That's the sort of toss up, if you know what I mean. But yeah, absolutely. If you went direct heating and you condemned your gas, and you went direct heating, of course, 100%.
And also, I'm sure you'll have seen, and I've certainly come across churches which take a hybrid approach, and they might keep their gas-fired space heating and use that for the big occasions, for the Sundays, for the weddings and Christmas, but then have a direct heating solution that does smaller services, smaller activities, Tuesday evenings, Thursday morning groups, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. If you looked at your church and said, look, when it's Christmas, we need this hot, we want it nice, you want to walk in, take your jacket off, comfy, you're here for hours, perfect. Keep that system. But if you've got a Sunday service where, you know, your congregation takes up sort of half the nave, a couple of Quartz halogen heaters, you'll be burning 6 kilowatts for an hour to heat those people directly, maybe tuck a couple behind the arches in the chancel, and away you go. So 100% if you had a hybrid system, and your running costs would be tiny.
Right. The next question is from Jemima, which I imagine is in lots of people's minds, which is about how much these things cost. And I imagine the answer to that is how long it's a piece of string. But
Yeah.
maybe you can talk about the relative costs of the different kind of solutions you spoke about.
Absolutely. I have first-hand experience in selling half the products we've got here. Now let's make up some money. I would say you're looking parts £2,000 to 4,000, maybe 5,000 for the parts. If you've got an extremely large church, it might be a bit more, but it's that kind of number. Again, this is very, very vague, and don't hold me to it, but it's that kind of money. And then it's your installation on top of that, and that's where it can definitely vary. But it's that kind of money. It's not, I wouldn't say it's frightening. It's not tens of thousands of pounds. None of these systems are tens of thousands of pounds to buy. It's just your install costs on top of that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
The next question, so there's actually a few related questions, so I might group them all together. So there's a question from Nick that says, are there any health risks associated with infrared heaters? A friend has reported a lot of headaches. Someone else has asked about whether heated cushions are a problem for menopausal women. Someone else has asked whether heated cushions are a problem for men. And then someone else has asked whether children crawling is a problem with pew heaters. So if we kind of group those, are there any health and safety risks from any of these solutions?
Health and safety. The headache thing, I think, can be avoided if the heaters are mounted a bit higher. Because if your heater is mounted at 1.7 meters and you're sat there, it's here, you know, it's there and it's hot. Mount it higher. And the best thing to do is if you're looking at you're at the back of the church, looking down the nave, make sure the heaters are angled slightly towards the chancel so that they're not in anyone's eye line. You're not staring into a heater. That's what I would definitely say. So if they're just facing straight in, move them a little bit, and I think that would help. The heated cushions, I'm not expert enough to answer that question. I would hate to say the wrong thing. I think for questions like that, definitely get onto a manufacturer. Definitely, you know, the pew heaters are always an interesting one. So the surface temperature, and I can only speak about our pew heaters. Now, the surface temperature will be similar to a radiator. It's about 75-80 degrees. So that is what a thermal cutout in a radiator will not let a radiator's surface temperature go more than that. So if you touch an 80-degree radiator / pew heater, it's hot. Of course, it's hot. Is it human nature to pull away? An adult, definitely. You know, we're smart enough. Is a small crawling top going to do that? I don't know. So I'll be very, very honest there. Yeah, they are radiator temperature, so it's not ridiculous. It's not dangerous, but it's hot. I wouldn't, you know, yeah, 100%. It's radiator temperature. Hope that helps.
Just to add in on the heated cushions thing, because I happen to be trying a sample at the moment because we're running a trial on them. I think it would depend on whether you get ones which can be individually turned on and off for each person, or whether they are turned on as a whole group, and therefore you can't individually control them. So the one that I'm trying out has an individual control. So then if I get too warm, I turn it off, and then when I get too cold, I turn it back on again. So then I think the comfort is down to the individual. I'm sure if you have them all turned on one control, there might be some people who feel too warm and some people who feel too cold, but then that's probably true of any heating solution on the market, I would have thought.
100%. I think that the flip side of that is it's comfort and economy. So the comfort that for the end user to have that comfort and have that control is great. But also you're going to be saving so much money if you haven't got, if there's 10 rows of pews behind you all turned on with no one sitting on them. To be able to do them individually is great. It's great for your bills and for comfort, 100%.
So the next question is from Lynn, who asks, what standards should we be looking for regarding a choice of installer? Most seem to be incredibly busy and hard to get hold of. Any advice?
Oh, it is such a tricky one. It's such a tricky one. We deal with a number of contractors who almost solely do churches now, and half the time they don't even have websites. It's all word of mouth. It's all that kind of thing. So it really is a tricky one. What I would always suggest, there's the NIC EIC, which is, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a service that electricians get their work examined, and they have to pass tests, and they do it every single year. So you go on their website, you put in your postcode, it will give you registered qualified electricians. I mean, you might get a bad apple, but chances are you won't. If they've taken the time to pay to get that accreditation, you're going to get a competent electrician that I think could take on it. Or you just put it down there. There you go. You're going to get a competent electrician. It's not going to be a cowboy. It's going to be someone who knows what they're doing. So, but other than that, it is always tricky. But I would suggest Googling it. I know that sounds silly. Lots of contractors who take it seriously and do multiple churches will try and put it on their website for people that are looking for it. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Next question is from Hugh. Where can we buy electric cushions? Is there a website where we can see colours, sizes, prices, etc.? And very helpfully, Alison has already replied in writing what I was about to say, which is that if you look, I'll just put the link over into the chat. One of our case studies is of electric chair cushions that were tried out on a church in the Isle of Man. And the person who ran that pilot for us got so many inquiries that he's actually created a technical note and a little technical video that goes alongside it that explains what they used. And he also mentions another manufacturer, which is the one that we're currently using for the trial in EDS and IPS. So if you follow the link that I've just put in the chat, you can find all that technical information there, and hopefully that points you in the right direction. Now, Andrew has asked, how durable is the upholstery on heated cushions? We have a big bat population, so I guess we'd have to cover them. We're not in use to prevent damage. So the manufacturer of the one we're using in the trial, so they're a manufacturer called Sit and Heat. And so I've been asking them lots of questions because we're trialing them at the moment. And he has said that they've had some customers who've had the cushions for 6 years. The covers come off and can be washed. Now, they probably haven't had to stand up to bat issues. But equally, if you're using the chargeable cushions, then you'd be rounding them anyway at the end of the service in order to charge them and put them in a cupboard until the next time you need them. It would be different if you had the ones that lived out on the pews and were cabled in, which I guess you would need to cover in some way.
Yeah, tricky one.
So the next question is from Sam that says, we have a 3-phase supply, but there is confusion about whether it will accommodate pew heaters as well as lighting. AV system, etc. on a Sunday, and the AV system, etc. on a Sunday morning. Taking your example of 30 pews and 2 heaters at 300 watts per heater, what power supply would be sufficient for this system alone? Does that require a calculator at that point?
Yes, I'm not on my phone. I'm just using the calculator. So
there were a couple of other questions in the chat about what you meant about upgrading electrical supply, actually. So probably just kind of covering that in general as well as the specific would be really helpful.
No, absolutely. So if it was it was 300 watts times 2, and I had 30 pews, so we're at 18 kilowatts. So 18,000 divided by 230 is 78.2 amp. So what to work this out, firstly, get an electrician, because they'll be able to do this in two seconds for you. You've got to work out what you've got incoming, what main supply you've got incoming, how many amps you've got to play with. So for that pretend church that we made up will be 78.2 amp. Now that is by far going to be your biggest overhead and your biggest energy draw. Lighting nowadays, you get LED floodlights, they are tiny wattages, absolutely tiny, and you know, an AV system's not going to be that much either. So all you've got to do is just calculate how many amps, if everything was turned on, and include your kettle, because that'll be 13 amp, like include it all, turn it all on, and then get an electrician to see what your incoming supply is. So to answer the sort of second part of that, is that some churches will only have 100 amp coming in. So in that church, you've already got 78 for the heating, a kettle is 13, your light, you know what I mean? You start adding that up, and then you realize, wow, we can't turn all of this on at the same time without you tripping. So getting an upgraded power supply just means that the power coming to your building, you have more supply coming in, you have more to play with. I hope that makes sense. But with all of that, definitely get an electrician. Get an electrician in there. They can test it, and then it will be whatever the regional electricity supplier, Southern Electric or wherever it is, you know, for us down south. Speak to them, because they're going to then have to tap into the mains and bring a cable into the church. So where I've put that in the slides, it's really good to try and get a quote, because sometimes, depending on how far they have to travel with cables, it can get quite costly. So
yes, the person who asked the question said that the quote they had to upgrade their supply capacity was £90,000.
90,000?
I know.
Wow. Oh my word, I've never heard of it that high. Oh my goodness. That's that.
Now I'm conscious we've got 30 open questions in 3 minutes. George, if people are willing to stay a little bit longer, could you give me another 10 minutes? Would that be all right?
We can have as much time as you want. Not a problem.
I think even with an extra 10 minutes, we won't have got through them all, but we'll have done a good few more.
Far away, far away.
Now, I think we've sort of answered the next question. It says, does a 3-phase supply fulfill the criteria for an upgraded electrical supply? So if there's a church that's got a 3-phase supply for the kind of load you were talking about there, the 30 pews, etc., then that would be sufficient?
Absolutely, yeah. When I say upgraded, it's usually because people have got a church will have a very small incoming supply. So usually when you upgrade it, you go to 3-phase, 100 amp per phase. Great. It gives you so many options. But if you've already got 3-phase in there, chances are you'll have enough power spare to power up all the heaters or whatever you've got.
Great. Now, there's a couple of different people that have asked about electric underfloor heating, because it didn't come up as one of the options that you mentioned. Do you have any views on underfloor heating, and is it a potential solution?
Underfloor heating, it used to be an absolutely massive part of our business. We've been selling underfloor for donkey's years now. Now, first of all, you're digging your floor up, you're digging your pews up, you're digging everything up. You're putting, you know, if you go high density matting, you're at 200 watts per meter squared. If you've got a frequently used church, you can probably get away with it. Your problem is all your hot air is rising, it's dissipating. I've never been a fan of electric underfloor in churches. I think the electrical load gets very heavy, and I just worry that people get lured in. Well, this sounds great. Right, we'll turn that. You know, we all know how cold churches are. Turn that on in January and then tell me that it's what you wanted. And a lot of the time, for a very intermittently used church, I just don't think it is. And again, there are plenty of installs that have worked, and I'm not bashing it. I personally sell loads of it, and it is great. But I just think in a 1,000-year-old building with stone walls that's used once a week, few electric, you know, they're designed to heat your living room. They're not really designed to heat a big open space like that.
So for a regularly used church, maybe intermittently used church.
This is exactly it. And this is kind of where I started with saying, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've seen so many installs, and a lot of the time it's a solution that will work. It's just used in the wrong way. It's controlled in the wrong way. It's been installed in the wrong kind of church. But I hope that helps.
The next question, I think, again, is pointing at sort of hybrid solutions. So Valerie is asking, would it work to have pew heaters in the nave, but then have radiant heaters for the sanctuary and chancel? To which I assume the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it all the time. The most common project that I will quote will be pew heaters throughout the nave and the aisle, and then quartz halogen heaters in the chancel. 2 behind the arches. There we go. Absolutely. Yeah, it's the only time I slightly question it is if you've got pew heaters and quartz heaters in your nave, and you've kind of doing it twice, if you know what I mean. I think it might be a bit of an overkill, but absolutely, you know, especially if you've got aisles that might not be used as frequently. Well, it doesn't really matter at that point. You can have either or. It doesn't matter. Have either or, you know.
Very interesting question from Adrian about drafts. So the different solutions that you outlined, do they have different issues, pros and cons in terms of causing circulation and drafts?
Drafts, not. Cushions and pew heaters, no, absolutely not. Quartz halogen heaters and far-infrared long-wave heaters, absolutely not. I mean, drafts, the only time you're going to get a draft is either a draft coming into a building, as in through your door, under your door, like any building, or introducing a fan heater, which again, good, bad, the ugly. I've seen people put fan heaters in churches, and I just close my eyes in disbelief. They just don't work. They're noisy, and you will get a draft. If it's an industrial fan heater, absolutely, you'll be stood at the other end and you'll be able to feel it. So that I just think is impractical, and don't put a big fan heater in a beautiful building. But draft wise, no, I just when I say things like an unobtrusive heater, no draft, no light, I want to paint a picture that you just fit and forget these products. You just don't hear them. You don't see them. You're not sitting there with a bit of air blowing on your face for an hour. You know what I mean? So, but none of those heaters.
The ones which are convective heaters, though, like the panel heaters and the storage heaters, those must be causing air circulation, mustn't they? In the same way that a normal radiator would.
100%, but you'd never feel it. You'd never feel it. The only way you'd feel it is some storage heaters have fans in them. So if you are going a storage heating route, some have fans in them. That's where you might feel a draft. But draft for me, I deal with big warehouses with big heaters. We have big destratification fans. So as your warm air rises, that pushes it back down. Never put one of those in a church, but that's where you start feeling draft and seeing draft and that kind of thing. But other than that, no, not at all.
Next question is from Jackie. Can chandelier heaters be retrofitted to existing fittings?
So if you had a chandelier and you want to retrofit a chandelier heater on there, of course you can. 100%. If you've got all your mounting positions and your wiring ready, well, wiring, that's going to be your issue, because obviously if you've got wiring for lighting, it's not going to take 10 kilowatts worth of heat on a chandelier. But absolutely, you could retrofit it. 100%. Yeah. But I guess if you're wondering whether you could get the chandelier that you currently have and install heaters onto it, of course, you just might need an installer who knows what they're doing. At the end of the day, if you've got a metal chandelier and a heater with a bracket, you're only drilling a couple of holes. So it's not that difficult. But yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine my conservation colleagues having a few things to say about that. So we might just park that one. How are we doing for time? Another couple of minutes.
Plenty of time.
Do radiant heaters have to be directed straight down, or can they be angled on roof beams that are at 45 degrees?
If you've got roof beams that are above, well, there's two types of radiant heaters. Long waves, absolutely. Well, the only problem you'll get if you've got a big church, and we're up 8 meters, and you point them 45 degrees, I'd have to do some calculations on that, because you might start losing a bit of your radiant effect because it's ultimately hitting the roof on the other side. So again, that would be lean on your manufacturer to get a proper design there. Shortwave heaters, the quartz halogen heaters, if you had them, again, tall ceiling of 45 degrees, I think if you're up 8 meters, 7 meters, they wouldn't work regardless of the angle of them, unfortunately. But I think it depends on the ceiling height. I think it depends on the ceiling height. A smaller church, yeah, you could probably get away with it. I think. Again, it's working out where that beam is going. It's all right saying 45 degrees, but at what height and how wide is the nave and all this kind of stuff. And again, that's when you've got to lean on the manufacturer and say, look, this is what we might want to do. Will it work?
Just putting in the chat a link through to a case study of Charlegrove, which does indeed have infrared heaters on a pitched nave.
Nice. Is that the radiant panels? Yeah, they're I think they're ours.
Right, that's also about underfloor heating. If three-phase supply only provides 300 amps and that isn't enough for a system, how did you get more amps?
I put it to you that you should really ask yourself why that isn't enough. That's a lot of heat, and I heat big buildings. And when people, if you've got 100 amp three-phase and you're heating a church, unless it's a cathedral, you really should have enough power there. I never quote anything that goes anywhere near that. I mean, again, that example, that was 78 amp. Yep. So even if you doubled that and it's a big church, you're only using half the power. But if you have to upgrade that, it's a whole different ball game. But I don't think a standard size church should be okay with 100 amp three-phase.
The next question from Steve says, I've heard that some DACs aren't supportive of radiant heaters that glow red. Do you know what is their policy on whether these are acceptable? I think it's a fair point, Steve. I think generally the glowing heaters aren't generally seen as a very good aesthetic choice.
Yeah. And
the kind of cases that come to Church Buildings Council are normally the highest listed buildings. It's always case by case, though. We would certainly expect a church to have looked pretty hard at its options and be able to make a case as to why installing the glowing type of heaters is the right answer. But I'm not saying that it never gets. I'm not saying it never gets permission. But just the aesthetics in a listed church certainly can be difficult. Question from Brian. We would like to get our own power from solar panels. I'm trying to work out what the actual question is here. We would like to get our own power from solar panels and the upgraded supply system. We're switching from gas space heating. We fancy far-infrared would be most suitable. I think that's probably the question is, would far-infrared be the most suitable? Which I think we can't answer from that amount of information. It'll so depend, Brian, on your church, I mean, and the usage. And
that's exactly it. And that's what I hope I've explained, that it's not a one size fits all. So if you want to go with far-infrared, long-wave infrared, great. To replace a gas system, great. If you've got a regularly used church, brilliant. And if you can back that up with solar panels, even better. And if you can store, if you've got a battery that you're storing that power from the solar and storing it and then using it, it's absolutely wonderful. If your roof can take them, brilliant. That's an absolutely wonderful way of going net zero. 100%.
The next comment is a comment, really, rather than a question. What about the financial implications of raised gas prices? Our church is already struggling to pay for heating, with planned giving going down and attendance declining. That is the reality in many places. I suppose the positive side of that is that if a church moves to a more efficient form of heating the people rather than heating the space, then you will be using less energy. So it's better for the environment, but it also will cost less money.
That's exactly it. It's that fine line of the initial install of any system is high, But then going forward, your running costs, potentially with a direct heating system, are tiny, absolutely tiny. And you can calculate them. Again, I didn't go into calculating energy consumption for a space heating system. There's too many variables, different times of the year are warmer and hotter and all sorts of stuff. But with a direct heating system, you can absolutely work out what it will cost you using your tariff, how many kilowatts are there and how many hours you use it for. To the penny, you can guess it. So you can calculate it, sorry. So.
Now, I'm conscious that we still have a lot of unanswered questions, but it is 5:10 and it is a Friday afternoon. So I'm going to bring us to a close. I'm sorry to everyone who had a question that we haven't got to. I've covered all of the ones that had the most upvotes, so I'm very sorry. I will, George is going to send me his slides, and then on Monday I'll send everybody who's been here today the links from the chat and the slides, and next week we will get the recording up on our website, and we're running the same topic again on the 18th at lunchtime. So if you're thinking, oh, I really want to hear that again, then please do book onto the second road and come along. George, thank you so much. You covered a lot of information in such a clear and such an accessible way, and I really appreciate it. You've clearly prepared and put a lot of work into how do you convey all of that really clearly, so thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you everyone who's joined us today. I do hope you found it useful, and I hope I'll see you at another topic in the future. Goodbye everyone.